Disclaimer. I understand that the video may contain some missing information. If you'd like to add on to this video, educate me in the comments. Let's start the video. Sweden, a nation of the north that has a long-standing record of staying neutral for over 200 years. As they finally settled down as a pacifist nation, development of the country began to be on par with other nations in Europe during the Industrial Revolution, since it was in proximity to the UK, who started this new era of unprecedented labor. Since then, Sweden would come to be known for many things, such as their furniture industry because of companies like IKEA in 1943. In the sphere of music, groups like ABBA would come to be recognized on a global stage during the 1970s and 1980s. As for entertainment, with YouTube established as the world's go-to website for videos during the early years, personalities from Sweden would start to emerge on the platform. One Swedish personality would become a living legend who became one of the most subscribed individual YouTubers of all time, PewDiePie. You've seen the title of the video already. The point is, these moments in Sweden's modern history share something in common to what I'll discuss in this video. So, let's discuss Sweden's history of the video game industry, which started earlier than Denmark's gaming industry by a few years. The first company in Sweden that paved the way for its video game industry was Intron Electronics back in 1982. They have originally started out with creating software for computers in relation to accounting and administrative tasks. During the year, they began to delve into video game development as they were following the footsteps of American video game companies like Atari and Magnavox Odyssey, who had pioneered the video games industry during the 1970s. With the VideoPad console developed by Philips, they began work on developing games such as Trans-American Rally and Nightmare, which were one of the early known games to be developed by a Swedish software company during the early 1980s. However, Intron discontinued the development of video games by 1985 as other consoles from outside of Sweden would come to the demand of the gaming market, such as the Commodore 64. During this period, passionate indie game developers would come into the scene as they made their own games for these new foreign consoles that they wanted to play on. Enter ATOD. In 1987, they began making their own original games that would restart the Swedish gaming industry and move forward as a proper video game developer. Later in the 1990s, the company switched to creating games based on famous cartoon shows of the past such as Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry, and also create games based on pop culture icons of the era. During the decade, Sweden had also developed their own consoles to develop their games on. However, the Amiga console grew popular among Northern European nations since a lot of developers in Europe had used the Amiga console to make games during the 1980s. At the end of the decade, Sweden would begin to produce video games more frequently as well as make their own consoles to play their games on until the arrival of other foreign consoles like the Nintendo Entertainment System, Commodore 64, and the Amiga. The 1990s will radically change the Swedish gaming industry into a more professional form of business both at home and abroad. So let's talk about DICE. Welcome to the 90s. Sweden was about to witness an avalanche of video game companies being established throughout the country, like with South Korea during this period. And the first company to move Sweden's gaming industry forward was Digital Illusions Computer Entertainment, aka DICE, in 1992. Amiga was still the console of choice during the first half of the 90s as games were being created for the Amiga console until the arrival of the internet, modern PCs, and other consoles like the PlayStation by the end of the decade. So, what new changes came with Sweden's video game boom? The first is that it made video game development into a proper profession in Sweden, along with the advent of companies like Daydream Software and Lahendo Entertainment making their debut in cities like Umeå and Vaxo. As for the games that were released in Sweden at this time, such as Benefactor, Safecracker, and Think Smallwood, the country was serious about making video games into an industry that will not only make them rich, but will also inspire and train the next generation of Swedish game developers to create more games as the new century was coming up. To the 2000s, we innovate. Sweden enters the new millennium with a growing game industry like their neighbor Denmark during this new era of game development. It was also during this era in Sweden's gaming industry where merging with other game development companies became popular. Examples such as Paradox Interactive, Imogen Form, and Starbreeze AB have a history of merging with other game development companies for financial gain or to own games from these companies to post as their own. As for games released during the 2000s, such as Enclave, Pearl Harbor Trilogy in 1941, Red Sun Rising, and Death Row, show off a new kind of approach to game design for the industry. Some companies have used other means of promoting their games, such as animation or music, as a type of inspiration for how these games are created. By the 2010s, games in Sweden will go the extra mile in developing games using high-quality SFX and actors resembling the characters in the game, like in Mafia 3, for example. Since the 1990s, game development and publishing companies throughout Sweden tend to establish themselves in cities like Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö. The majority of these current and upcoming game companies would be concentrated in these cities. Sweden was reaching new heights with their games by the end of the 2000s. However, there is one game in particular that would put Sweden on the already global map that they've achieved several years ago. Let's cover that in detail for a moment. Now, it's not a Swedish game industry history video without mentioning one of the most popular games to have ever come out of Sweden up to this point: Minecraft. An open-world sandbox game that began its early development in 2009 by Mida's player employee who would become a memorable figure in releasing the most played game of all time: Marcus Persson. Going back to the conception days of Minecraft, Marcus, or Notch, began development on a file that he developed during his free time since he worked for a game development company called Mida's Player. The company that would later become King, the very same company that created the Candy Crush Saga years later. After Mida's Player found out that he was developing a game during his off time, Notch left the company to join J-Album, where he would meet his new boss, Carl Manne, who was supportive of his game. Later, Notch would discover the game Infiniminer, where the source code was made public by the game's original creator, Zach Barth. His source code inspired Notch to polish his concept game project and turn it into an infinitely generated atmosphere of 3D blocks that would form caves and open land all around the player. He then published his now alpha game to an indie game forum that he joined prior to the polishing of his new game and called it Minecraft: The Order of the Stone, which would later be renamed to just Minecraft. During his time in the forums, Notch would meet Daniel Rosenfeld, who was known as the infamous C418, where he offered to make sounds for Minecraft. As the game started to attract more players, Notch needed to establish a company that would not only manage the sales of Minecraft, but also focus on the game as a full-time job. So, he called together Manne and a friend named Jacob Porser to come together to establish a game development company called Mojang in 2009. 2010 was a year where Notch would experience two events happening. The first was the deal he was given to work at Valve, in which he declined the offer soon after. The second became history for Mojang unofficially, as Notch had held the very first Minecon at a park in Bellevue, Washington, that became the foundation for the first official Minecon held by Mojang themselves in 2011, when the company and Notch would once again make history by pulling the lever that will launch Minecraft as a complete game. After the game's completion, Notch wanted to move forward with developing other games and started to distance himself from Minecraft by having Jens Bergensten, aka Jeb, take over as the game's new lead developer. In 2014, Notch would land a deal with Microsoft to sell off his shares of Mojang, which in turn also gave them Minecraft to promote in their stores, which is still available to this day. Notch would become a millionaire soon after and later moved to an expensive mansion in California where he still resides to this day. Minecraft became a global hit after 2014 and became one of the best-selling games of all time. The last game to achieve such a title was Wii Sports back in 2006. And ever since, many developers wanted to ride on the Minecraft hype by making copycats or making their own original game inspired by Minecraft and the late Infiniminer game. So let's see how impactful Minecraft and many other games were during the 2010s. As Minecraft became very successful for the industry, a bunch of other companies wanted to create games that also gave the player the ability to build freely and fight enemies for resources that would further advance them in their forever worlds. This is where game dev companies like Iron Gate Studios, Axolot Games, and Echo Entertainment would enter the scene with games like Scrap Mechanic, Valheim, and Tor that would take inspiration from Minecraft because of its freedom to do what you want and build wherever you want concept. And these companies would later inspire future developers to create games like V-Rising that is also based on the free building open world concept from games of the past, where Minecraft had perfected the concept of the open world survival building genre. And to this day, Minecraft is still given credit for this kind of genre of games to exist. Infiniminer was the original pioneer, but Minecraft was the foundation that became the model for future conceptions of these kinds of Swedish games to ever exist in the first place. During the 2010s, other game genres from Sweden would start to be developed and released. More specifically, genres like FPS and co-op games would become the main focus of the Swedish gaming industry, since game devs wanted to focus more on multiplayer games that invited players and their friends into the game through cooperation. Games like Helldivers, Battlefield, and Wolfenstein: The New Order would introduce a new era of Swedish gaming compared to the past where games didn't require such a high budget to make. It shows the maturity of the gaming industry in Sweden and how far it has come since the days of experimentation during the era of the North American video game crash of 1983. Around this time, more indie devs would enter the scene with their own games that were published to Steam and other related websites where their games can be sold to. As for the mobile game side of Sweden, besides candycrushsaga becoming the most well-known Swedish mobile game of all time, they also followed the trend of co-op in these mobile games. But for most of the 2010s, the mobile gaming market was very saturated in the same common tropes of adventure, western fantasy, and puzzle-type games coming from other countries in the West. Which is the reason why the Swedish gaming industry focuses more on developing games for PC than for the mobile market. So basically, Sweden's gaming industry has become so large because of its way of developing and producing games for all types of platforms. Its main focus is to create games with multiplayer built into them where the player can engage with the environment and feel of the game, like with any other game. So what did the 2020s offer to Sweden besides the pandemic? let's see. A fresh new decade for Sweden's gaming industry. A new decade where Minecraft is over a decade old, gun games are still on the rise, and indie devs getting the spotlight on their own creations that have won the hearts of a new generation of fans that played their games. However, throughout Sweden's game industry history, there have been companies that were sold off to another, went bankrupt, and or lagged behind on updates to their games. Those kind of companies tend to fail due to greed, financial troubles, or the way how they develop their games as they come to a stagnation and eventually get abandoned altogether. Which is why these companies tend to adapt to another or go sunset, and the former employees go off to start a new company to create games for and actually succeed. Overall, Sweden's gaming industry has mostly been going up for years, especially with their recent games like Helldivers 2, which was popularized through memes and content that fans and players make. Some of the old guard of Swedish games like Minecraft, unironically, along with Battlefield and candycrushsaga still maintain a solid player base to this day because of the playability of those games that still captivate both the older and younger audience that continue to play those games today. So here's a recap of Sweden's game industry. In the early 1980s, the industry was born out of a software company that started creating video games as a small division to test the waters of video game development in the country. By the 1990s, the practice and incorporation of video game development and publishing companies became commonplace and well professionalized for the next stage of video game development in the country. Around the 2000s, several game development companies decided to merge and sell their companies to domestic and or foreign companies for financial gain and for ownership of games made in Sweden. During the 2010s, the concept of Minecraft would inspire the next generation of game developers to create games that have the same concept of a Minecraftian type of game. It was also where co-op and FPS games would come to flourish in the Swedish gaming scene as multiplayer games became increasingly popular. As for mobile games, some tend to be more unique than other games of the time, but the majority of them tend to follow the trend of what is popular among mobile players, despite the market becoming overly saturated by the end of the decade. As for the 2020s, the pandemic has surely slowed down development and business for Sweden, but it still continued in the gaming sphere where games were still being developed. These days, the focus for Swedish games has been on multiplayer AAA titles and the indie gaming scene, where they've been mastering the practice of diversifying into different aspects of game development at a global scale. Much like Denmark and South Korea in their own game industries respectively. I'd like to make more of these kinds of history videos in the future because I feel like the more I talk about 21st century history of this caliber, the more informed people would be about their favorite games. Thanks for watching. See you next time.